I would like to thank the organizers for such a wonderful meeting and inviting us to talk about this aspect of NGS-based approach in the clinical practice. And what we have done, we have combined the two moderation together, and Dr. Ashish and myself are going to moderate this session and to have a utility of this time actually and to interact more with the audience. We have divided the panelists into two teams. The A team, which is on the right hand side, practically left on your side, is the one who is going to be favoring the NGS based approach, and the team on the other side, this team B, is going to favor the conventional approach. Is that correct? So all are clear with their agendas. So Dr. Ashish and myself are going to present some cases and going to put some questions to the expert. And these all experts are going to serve like manikas to us to give the amrita to all of us so that we have that gyan and take it to our clinics tomorrow morning. And with that start, and I'll ask Dr. Ashish to present the first case.
Very good morning. Thank you, Dr. Viraj and the organizers for having us all here. And it's been an interesting morning. And I can see there was very detailed discussions and active participation. So we'd like to continue that. And so it's a panel discussion, and I'm a moderator, even though Amit has said that it's team A and team B. Being a moderator, I would like to stay neutral, and I will just emphasize what comes out, and then we will also invite participation from the floor, and so that we go ahead and get the rest of the session. Now, so we all know that NGS and molecular testing. I remember about 10, 12 or 12 years ago, on a similar meeting, there was a sparring and all those. At that time, the colon cancer sessions used to be like, the debates were used to be like, should we use oxaliplatin, should we use irinotecan? At that point in time, there was no molecular testing required. Cetuximab was just coming in. So today's day, why are we like breaking our heads on it? Because we know that newer therapies like immunotherapy and targeted therapies have shown we can improve outcome survival, and therefore that this is we mainly need these agents to kind of decide which patients should be offered these therapies. My panel agree? I mean, do you all think there's any other usage of these tests? I mean, when you have a patient with GI cancers, do you make chemotherapy decisions based on molecular tests? Or it's mainly the newer therapies? Yeah.
Not the chemotherapies particularly. It will be in the advanced.
So it's mainly in target therapy. Okay, so so we'll just discuss. This is one of my patients. Just so we are following a good discussion on colon cancer. So the first case is a lady with colon cancer. So this is a 41-year-old lady who lives somewhere in Andhra Pradesh. She had just a 1-month history of low abdominal pain, and then suddenly it got worse for the last 4 days, and she was admitted in a hospital. A CT scan was done, and she was found to have a large bowel obstruction, and there was a growth in the descending colon. So she underwent an emergency surgery. It was a left hemicolectomy on November 2018. And so after surgery, she recovered, and then she came to us. And on the histopath review, this was a report. So this was a moderately differentiated adenocarcinoma. It was a left colon, left hemicolectomy, and the tumor was a T3 tumor. And with whatever block she brought, and also on corroboration with outside report, of the 8 lymph nodes dissected, none of the lymph nodes had any metastasis. So Dr. Bhavesh, as a medical oncologist, when you talk to this patient, how do you plan your treatment?
We have right now, probably the number of nodes has not been adequately done.
Okay. So we do a CT scan right now, and there we don't see any lymph nodes. We don't see any peritoneal disease.
Definitely, even if the lymph nodes are not there, the sampling will not be adequate. So we would consider probably
So you decided, because of young age, obstruction, high-risk features, we would decide to give adjuvant chemotherapy. That's okay. Dr. Harsh, suppose this patient also gets referred to, because she's 41. Okay, maybe I start with ma'am, because you're a genetic counselor. She comes to your clinic. At this point in time, would you advise any tests?
Yes, so first of all, I take family history,
Yeah.
and then on that basis, I'll advise.
There's no family history of any.
Then also, I will advise a genetic test.
You would advise a test, Dr. Harsh. What would be your approach? What kind of tests? What tests? Patients would ask you, doctor, what do I do?
See, the first thing I would do is I would use an NSI.
Okay.
Because clearly that has prognostic implications.
So you would ask the pathologist to run those 4 IHC markers?
You can either run IHC, you can run NSI PCR, you can run NGS-based NSI, whichever one you prefer.
Okay.
My preference in this case, then, because this is a primary human, then I would rather go for an NGS-based assay.
Sure.
Where you can not only do NSI, but you get information on other markers very early on, so that.
So to the medical oncologist in the panel, I mean, how often in such a patient you would start discussing NGS on day 1?
Not on day one, not on day one. Particularly, there is no family history. I won't discuss this one.
Okay. Anyone wants to differ? People for NGS, anyone wants to differ? Yeah.
Sorry, I have to agree with Dr. Mansi. She's 41 years old. She does qualify for genetic testing from a hereditary perspective. So I know it's a doctor-patient to take on when they get diagnosed, but I do feel that this should be at least discussed with the patient.
Yes, so suppose the patient says, okay, doctor, you do, you please go ahead and do what is required. So what would you do? Should you just order NGS for all patients like this in your clinic? Or we would just go down the IHC first and then take it from there?
IHC, yes, would be done.
Yeah.
But keeping that aside, from a hereditary perspective, I would go in for a multi-gene panel. Even
Okay.
if she doesn't have a strong family history, taking her age into consideration.
So multi-gene panel means you will take blood and okay, so no, you're not for tumor testing, you're for germline testing. Straight away germline testing. Okay, anyone?
There is two more things actually. A couple of people tend to miss out. Yes, family history is very important in recognizing whether there is an inheritance pattern. But a lot of times, patients who come in clinic where there is no family history, it's quite likely it's a de novo mutation. That's a mutation that has just appeared in the germline of that patient. So you can't simply rely on family history.
And
Right.
there can be a mutation which was a carrier mutation in all the ancestors from
Sure.
where she belongs to, and that will just express in her, because these days the lifestyle habits and everything has to be taken into consideration.
Sure. So in this case, we did discuss some testing is required, but we decided, okay, we'll do it at a later point in time, because patients, right now our emphasis was more on adjuvant treatment. Now, just assuming if we had done this and if this has come MSI high, would that help any one of you say, okay, good prognosis tumor, I would not do adjuvant therapy? Any medical oncologist would think like that? Or you would still do adjuvant chemotherapy anyway? Suppose this tumor was MSI high, T3N0. Any medical oncologist can take the question. Would you, suppose the patient comes with a report saying MSI high tumor,
This would be a stage 2 high risk.
stage 2 high risk clinical features, MSI high on molecular testing.
That stage 2 high risk is worse prognosis than stage 3 low risk. So I would say
Yes, but then if you put in a high MSI high, which is a good risk, which is a good prognostic factor.
1 plus 1 minus.
Yes. So that's the dilemma you're going to face. So why order a test when you don't know, where it's not going to change your treatment options?
That's why I said that it's a young patient. I would go and
So one usage is to check whether patient has a genetic predisposition and work on that. Other thing is its utility in deciding the current treatment. So if the any medical oncologist would not give chemotherapy if this was MSI high? Yeah, so basically the take-home message is that even though we have indications from molecular testing that which may help in deciding the prognosis is good, but as of now, as per recommendation or guidelines, we wouldn't ignore the clinical
high-risk features, even if you have a report like that. So we treated this lady with adjuvant capecitabine. We did not add oxaliplatin because we were not sure whether she's a stage 2. And then she did complete 6 months of therapy. And at 6 months, when we did the CT scan, this was a CT scan picture, which shows that there is a large adnexal mass. This mass involves both adnexa, and in the transverse section, if you see, upper abdomen was clear. So, so now what next? I mean, we just had a very good debate between Vamshi. Yeah. Yeah.
Suppose if it's MSI high,
Yeah.
then there are studies that there are resistance of 5FU and capacity.
So that's what I asked.
Capecitabine.
That's what my previous question was. If it was MSI high,
You should have added oxaliplatin.
no, there is no data to support what you're saying.
There's some data that alone capecitabine or 5FU in MSI high can be detrimental
See,
also.
oxaliplatin as a drug is useful in stage 3 colon cancer, where there's an improvement in survival to the tune of 2 to 3%. In stage 2 colon cancer, there is no benefit of adding oxaliplatin to 5FU.
But if it's MSI high, there are also some studies of
MSI high, we know that because of the problem in with antimetabolites, they don't get kind of incorporated in DNA so well, so they are not that effective. But there's no data to date to say that any other class of drug should be given just because you're MSI high.
in up to date, they have
No. No, so just because you're MSI high, you're not going to treat this patient with oxaliplatin, right? Yeah. So these are all. Yes. Yes. But so if there are risk factors, you do chemotherapy. If there are risk factor, doesn't mean you do oxaliplatin in stage 2.
If MSI is high, anyway you are questioning the effect of 5FU. And if you pick up any guidelines, even MD Anderson guidelines for their treatment protocol, MSI high, if you are planning for chemotherapy, add oxaliplatin. That also they have specifically said FOLFOX, not even APOX. So,
but that's for stage 2. I'm not aware if for stage 2 they say like that.
Stage 2, but you won't give chemo in a stage 2 unless there are risk factors, right? So if there are risk factors, you have decided to give chemo. If the patient is MSI high or DMMR, FOLFOX is the way.
it is written in up to date also that because of this 5FU related mortality in MSI high or low effectiveness of 5FU, there is some resistance of 5FU in MSI high. You can overcome by adding oxaliplatin. There are studies, not.
I mean, I am not aware of a single study which has studied efficacy of oxaliplatin in MSI high tumors. So I mean, okay, we can look it up maybe later. I'm not aware of any single study. Anant, are you aware of anything like that? Anant, yeah.
So this, what he was saying is based on 2003 paper.
Yeah.
They said that platins might overcome the lack of effect of 5FU. But as you rightly said, there is no data for this. But as Dr. Amish said, recommendations are there. But there is no phase 2, phase 3 data.
Yeah,
so all 4 of them.
So for stage 3, agree. For T4, yeah. Sure.
Stage 2 as well.
But then how can we have recommendation without data?
That's
the
way it is.
Yeah.
There are recommendations.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there any?
Let's continue
can I
with
ask you one question? Is there any data to say that capecitabine alone in this
so for a stage 2 colon cancer, we would give only 5FU, right? And we will not add oxaliplatin.
What is the data? Is there any phase 3 data on that?
So from the adjuvant trials, we know capecitabine can be replaced. 5FU can be replaced by capecitabine. Yeah. Okay, so moving on. Yeah.
This is a descending colon chemo, and you rarely get MSI high in the descending colon, on the left side colon.
Yeah.
So MSI may have a prognostic marker in the right side colon cancer, which is quite bad prognosis on its own. But in the left side, I've actually never seen an MSI high in the descending colon.
Sure.
I think that probably doesn't have the relevance.
Sure. So the incidence is lower. But yeah.
There is no data to add oxaliplatin on that.
Yeah. So I would also agree. I mean, till I see a data of improving outcomes in stage 2, even in MSI high, I mean, I think we should, that's an open debate. Okay, so now moving on, patient like this, now patient has recurrence. So we don't have a surgeon on the panel, but further, what would you advise now? Would you advise NGS now, or what would you do? Anybody from the lab?
After recurrence and
Okay. Okay. So Bhavesh, do you want an NGS or you want any other? You just want a panel testing. What is your practice generally for a metastatic first-line colorectal cancer? What is your practice in your institute?
So we do say all-RAS, we say PILA, cervical biomarkers which we do.
Sure. So you would want to do a pan-RAS testing and a BRAF testing. That's because that's standard, because now you're in a metastatic disease, you may want to use molecular targeted therapies, right? Okay, so so for this patient, we had an MDT, and it was felt that the first surgery was done outside, and therefore we're not sure whether what was the cause for the recurrence. Was it just bad biology, or was it because of small volume peritoneal disease which was missed initially? So our surgeons felt that it may be possible, because she's young, it may be possible to give her a benefit of doubt of a complete cytoreduction and high PEC. And so that was the plan made in MDT. But when they went in, they found that there was a large tumor and there were multiple other peritoneal deposits which were not seen on the CT scan. And there was an extensive peritoneal disease, PCI score of 26, the small bowel cirrhosis was involved, the mesentery was involved, and therefore it was decided intra-op that she is not a patient who is likely to benefit from a CRS high PEC, and therefore biopsies were taken and the surgeon came out. Now, so to the people in the lab who deal with samples, so as Bhavesh said, we need molecular testing. You've got two tumors now. You've got a primary tumor and you've got metastatic tumor. If you have to do NGS, you want to run on which sample? And do you think there will be a discord? Are there any reports of any discordance? Yeah.
There are chances of discordance. We need to have a first basic NGS from the first of the block.
Okay.
And simultaneously check out the same mutations on the second block, which was weaker. So we need to do NGS if the patient is appropriate.
So you're saying you want to do both? The Amit sir, because we deal with cost and other things, yeah.
I would, I think, so I think I would suggest doing it on the recurrent tumor, on the metastatic tumor, which is the latest one. Because even if the new mutations have come up, there is a new tumor and we have to treat those mutations. If those are treatable or those can guide us on metastatic tumor.
So even
I want the team lead to navigate what team is. I want the competition.
Yeah, no, I want all the geneticists to answer what he has said, is that does the driver mutation change in the evolution or the natural history of the disease? Practical experience.
It's definitely changes. Definitely. We have so many changes.
Your clinical experience.
Yes, we have seen many patients.
So tumors, so one thought is tumors mutate and there's heterogeneity intra-tumor and also across metastatic sites. And
Chemotherapy might be suppressing one of those tumor region, and then another one is coming up which is growing.
yes, now, yeah, because this is important because
What Amit is asking, does the driver mutation change or does it pick up then better in the recurrent setting? That's a different thing. So once you have a driver, will it change on chemotherapy without using target therapy? That is the question.
Yeah. So generally, in my experience, the driver doesn't change. The principal driver would still be there, and the secondary mutations would definitely be there. So whether the secondary mutations are actionable is a point of it's a dilemma. So if I were to give a suggestion, I would say get on this metastatic site, get the block from that, and test on it. But with respect to how it changes, in a case I had these back, of course not with colorectal, but there was a German BRCA mutation in the somatic panel. It was less than 10%. It's reverting back because of olaparib therapy. So that is the...
Hello.
After people in the driver may be suppressed, but without using target therapy,
So when we look at these studies which have done matched biopsies, then at the same time I don't think we'll find any difference.
Can I make one point in colorectal? Yeah. I'll give you two examples where mutations do develop in colorectal, specifically example. One is the scenario where you have a RAS wild-type tumor, you treat with EGFR, and over the time they develop a clone of RAS mutation.
Yes.
We were always taught that KRAS is mutation. Always same from and old and new.
Even the Hercules study which Vamshi alluded to, the HER2 mutations are actually one of the resistant mechanisms.
Dr. Anant referred that if you treat with EGFR in wild type, the incidence of HER2 development is almost 10 to 12%.
Yes.
So these are two examples where you would want to test on the subsequent.
Yes. So therefore, when we're deciding a therapy in second, third, fourth line, I don't think that we should rely on the initial tumor biopsy. And therefore, that's why I'm one of the proponents of not jumping and doing NGS on the first time a patient comes to you, because we really don't know how much you can rely on that report when you actually need to give your targeted therapy. So this patient then underwent. So we have a PCR panel which actually includes the pan-RAS testing, which includes NRAS, and also it includes BRAF. And we have requested a pathologist to include even MSI in this panel using PCR. And we offer this for about 6,000 rupees. And this is done for every patient. So Dr. Harsh, I remember in your talk, your panel was exactly the same. So you're the best person to possibly compare this panel to what you're doing.
So, this panel is quite different to what my panel does.
Yes.
So, my panel answers three very simple questions. A, does the patient have MSI, tumor or not?
Yes.
B, does this tumor have BRAF or not? And third, is there a mutation in KRAS codon 12 and 13? Because that's where 97% of the time you find a mutation. Right? So that's a very, very specific, very targeted.
Yes. So what I see is like our panel may only be looking at BRAF V600E and not the other BRAFs. And also, I mean, you're using NGS, we're using PCR. So now this is supposed to be like a debate, NGS to be done or not to be done. So I'm not saying you should do NGS. What I'm saying is this test is good enough for general use as the first thing. I know you will disagree with me, and therefore I'm asking this question. Yeah.
One that you mentioned is cost. You mentioned 6,000 rupees. Equivalent to doing IHC, there might be commercial vendors around here who would say IHC can be done in 6,000. Great, but that's just telling you MSI. I give you guarantee I can do MSI, BRAF, KRAS, and I can even include these in my panel and do it all in 8,000. And I have analytical sensitivity for MSI, for picking MSI. If I just have 3% of the cells having MSI high signature, I can pick up BRAF mutation down to 1.5%.
Sure. So the point you're bringing out is that as an NGS is becoming cheaper, it's becoming more and more cheaper to create a panel. But I just want a show of hands in how many of you're able to get an NGS done for less than 10,000 rupees for your patients. Single person, less than 10,000 rupees? Okay, less than 20,000 rupees? Okay, so at the moment in our clinic, the cheapest test around 20,000 for a panel of maybe 10 genes, 12 genes. That is where we are. Like for tomorrow, if the same panel has to decide, okay, in our Pradhan Mantri Yojana, I mean, it's called Ayushman Bharat scheme, government is going to fund. If they want you to design a test, molecular testing in first line, what would your recommendation be to the government? Would it be this PCR test or would it be an NGS panel? Purvish sir, maybe you can say something.
I think it will be PCR.
Dr. Amit? Yeah.
3% of them fail to give identify NGS.
Yes. So again, to the people who work in the lab, how many labs do you think are there in our country who can give you, who are tried and tested, and one can trust their reports to cater to a population of 1.3 billion? Handful. So don't you think there's a there's a community demand versus supply mismatch. So is it right on our behalf to go back tomorrow to the clinic and say NGS is the only option for our patients?
Can I just answer that? How many people out here, people who work in the lab, trust to them, how many people can actually set up these many PCRs for 1.3 billion people compared to setting up what? If you give me Illumina MySet, which is the big machine, I can cater to 10 people, I can cater to 100, 200, 500. Give me NovaSet, in a single run, I can cater to over 1.3 billion.
One point also that we need to have in mind is the time. So AGS has a longer time.
The turnaround time, yeah. Okay. Sure. So this patient will say, I want to start chemotherapy this week. You tell me, is bevacizumab or cetuximab? Okay. Okay. Sure. Sure.
Can I just add a point to that?
Yeah.
Yes, if you do panel testing, especially germinal or somatic mutation, yes, it takes a lot of time to crunch the data, somebody has to review it. But if you're asking a very specific question, whether a mutation is present or not, it doesn't take a long time to answer that.
Sure.
They're not there.
Sure. So we are running short of time. So now, yes. Yeah. So just your estimate, ma'am, like how many NGS machines should be there in our country? Currently there is a severe shortage, right? So just concluding, so this patient has a BRAF mutation in exon 15, and just last ESMO GI, we have seen results from the phase 3 Beacon trial. And just to update you all that it's a positive phase 3 trial. This was a trial where in pre-treated patients in the second line, patients with BRAF mutation, they were randomized to chemotherapy plus cetuximab versus a totally chemotherapy-free regimen, which was encorafenib, binimetinib, and cetuximab, the triplet targeted therapy, and this was a positive trial. The response rate was like 2% versus 40%, and the PFS was 2 months versus 7 or 8 months. So fantastic data, right? So based on this, it's got an accelerated breakthrough approval in the US. So now Dr. Bhavesh, last comments. What are you going to do with this patient right now? Are you going to use the Beacon trial regimen or what? Not practical. Why is it not practical? Because none of these drugs are currently available outside of a clinical trial. And also, so at the end of it, I mean, if you're going to have a test where your treatment is not going to change based on the report, we all need to ask ourselves, do we spend 2.5 lakh rupees and do this test? Right? Okay, thank you. Yeah.
But the point is very clear that going forward, all these mutations is going to give answers in a situation when the answers are not there. So the hope at the end of the tunnel is what we are looking at. And a situation when the patient is keen to live long and the doctors are bound to give options. And legally, if you have options, you cannot deny treatment. That is also, Dr. Pravesh Parikh can then comment on that aspect. But so I'm going to present the situations beyond the failure of current conventional treatment. And does really NGS can give some light, or you can say options. And I want the panelists to comment in favor and in against so that we can have a discussion on the same. So we have this young gentleman, 42-year-old, diagnosed with metastatic gastric cancer upfront, and was, as per the standard guidelines, tested HER2/neu, which was turned out to be positive. He failed 2 lines of the standard treatment, including trastuzumab, actually. So definitely, we have failed what the conventional does. The big question is, why did it fail when you have such a big target, actually? So anyway, we did the genomic profiling, so it was a simple for us to order this test. And the report came out to be ERBB2 amplification, ERBB3 amplification. Some more tests were also, some more genes were also altered, including BRCA, CDK4, MYC, APC, and TOP2 and 53. So I want the other panelists, the B team, do you want to continue with the third line chemotherapy, or you want to change something based on the NGS?
I would like to see if I get more information with the NGS. And if there is no targetable drug, I would like to go for the actionable targetable drug. I would like to go for the conventional second line or third line chemotherapy.
So the team A, can you find the targets in this report for us? We have ERBB2, which is already there. We treat it with trastuzumab-based therapy. ERBB3, BRCA, CDK4, MYC, APC, TOP2A, P53. With the anthracyclines, that's what you want to pursue that. But in terms of target therapies, do we have any options based on these actionable? Dr. Amish? BRCA is one, yes. So, I want my experts, Dr. Tangri, Dr. Dar, to comment upon how do we take these things with this information in terms of clinical utility? Should we act on it, or should we know more information about it? So this is please, I want the audience to hear that, please.
So we have to look into the mutation, exactly what it is doing to the protein, whether we have any clinical evidences of it showing in the ClinVar and in all the other databases we have access to, whether any clinically proven data is there that is showing that this intronic rearrangement actually causes our BRCA gene to not function properly. So then...
So I give you the answer that this is a pathogenic having loss of BRCA, you can say, function. Now let's talk about the treatment option for the patient. So Team A, Dr. Ashish, do you want to still agree with what Team B says? Yes.
Then I would think that this ERBB2 amplification is something which is carried forward and is now resistant to anti-HER2 therapy. So that's not too useful. Now PRCA rearrangement is also failed with platinum. So I'm not sure as a clinician in my mind that what's the efficacy of PARP inhibitor is going to be after you fail platinum. And anything else, I really don't know how to act upon it. CDK4 amplification, should I use palbociclib? I'm not sure. TOP2A amplification, maybe I can use irinotecan.
So patient failed, yeah.
So at the end of this report, I'm going to give FOLFIRI, which I would have given even without this report.
Okay, fair enough. So Dr. Amish?
I know you are supposed to ask the question.
Yeah, please.
What Dr. Ashish mentioned about BRCA and platinum. In breast cancer, there's so many of ambiguity that whether BRCA really confers platinum sensitive or resistant, we still don't know. My question to you is that from the molecular aspect, does BRCA is synonymous with platinum sensitivity, what you see in clinical practice? And second thing is, when ERBB2 first time HER2 positive and it has not shown, how do you take these mutations into considerations when you decide the treatment?
Exactly. So I think I want to make a point here. When we see the report, we try to analyze what went wrong with the trastuzumab-based therapy. We have a very good target. Why it is not working? Let's try to dissect the report for a minute. And we have certain alterations which may be driver or which can be coexistent with different clones. But based on the HER2-based therapy, still the HER2 clone exists. So it means that there is inherent resistance to HER2-based therapy. So what is going down the stream which is not working? So just to highlight the ERBB3 amplification, which is a known mechanism of HER2-based treatment or resistance to HER2-based treatment, is the answer here. I would like to address this point that had we did this test beforehand starting trastuzumab, did we really go ahead with the HER2-based therapy? So this is a discussion to happen actually. So whether this approach later on is appropriate or had it been early on, I would have changed my treatment. So just to support my data, this is the high expression of HER3 has been associated with decreased survival in gastric cancer. This is an established, you can say, concept which is being used, and this is not rare. It is a common alteration which can happen in up to 10% of cases. So we are not talking about a rare phenomena. And then top of it, when you have this HER2 or HER3 interaction, which happens in this case because HER2 was amplified, this can activate PIK3 pathway like a storm, and then can have an implication in the prognosis actually. So what exactly we saw? So we know why it is failing. Are we really want to change the treatment accordingly or not? That's a big discussion. And there are studies which talks about using pan-HER inhibitors like neratinib, which can target HER2 and HER3 at the same time, and also EGFR. That could be a better approach in this situation if we had this information early on. So having a target and utilizing the target to the fullest is what we have to learn while doing NGS. So we are not here to discuss that we are ready as of now, but sharing experience with each other, sharing all these things can be a very important aspect which I want to bring to the floor actually. So from my experts team A, if you were given the option this upfront, let's say this is it's a metastatic setting, but you had this NGS report upfront, how would you like to treat the patient differently? I go back with the report now. So you have, I'm not going to be able to go back. It's not going back. Okay. So we have now two possible targets, the EGFR target, the EGFR pathway, and the BRCA pathway, that is the DNA repair pathway. How you want to utilize them actually? Do you want to target the EGFR? You want to target the BRCA? Can you please speak in the mic actually? I want the audience to hear about it.
Either I would not try to target the HER2 pathway with the traditional trastuzumab drug, because obviously there is a HER3 amplification which will obviously is going to show a decreased efficacy of the drug. But maybe pan-HER2 inhibitor.
But none of the pan-HER2 inhibitors are approved in gastric cancer. Are you still comfortable recommending that?
Yeah.
Are you still, Dr. Ashish, you want to take that?
Pan-HER2 inhibitor?
Yeah.
You mean pertuzumab?
So neratinib based, yeah. Or combining Herceptin with pertuzumab actually. So
I think the only point I want to take is I would go into all these only once I've exhausted all approved treatment. So here the question is, this is stomach cancer, second line or third line. Here, majority of the patients will not see the next line. This is going to be the last line of therapy, right? And even if there is a BRCA mutation, like from the pancreatic study, the Apollo study, we've seen that it only improves progression-free survival without any improvement in overall survival. And then on the other hand, we have FOLFIRI plus ramucirumab. I mean, that does improve overall survival. So I wouldn't jump and try experimental therapy unless I have exhausted.
I think the point is well taken. But I would like to emphasize most of the trials recruit patients failure of 2 lines. It is not upfront. So when we want to make a difference, it has to be upfront. When we have a target which is going to dictate the prognosis then and there actually, and we're not targeting them. So on the other hand, you have also a MYC amplification, which is a well-known, you can say, a biomarker in various cancers as a poor prognosis. So the point is well taken from, I'm talking on the behalf of team B here for a second, that whatever said and done, if you use the target therapy, the MYC amplification is going to dictate so that it is not going to work. So you have both the thoughts when you see the report, the explanation to the targeted approach, what is conventional. You can predict the failure, and you can also say whatever target you choose, you're not going to achieve the outcome what you expect. So many things can be analyzed based on the report per se. So any comments from the audience on this? So from the Dr. Amish, you want to say something?
I wanted to ask, since Dr. Parekh is in this thing, what Dr. Ashish said is practical, and what you are saying is more from the molecular aspect makes sense. but do we not exhaust the chemotherapy which has the data versus something which is, you are saying it is glaring in the eyes that it is not going to respond to chemotherapy. We accept your point, but do we have the liberty in the clinic outside the setting of a clinical trial to practice what you are saying?
The answer is no. I totally admit that the answer is no as of now. But with the option of personalized approach, I think the patient should be given the option to decide, not you. So you cannot say, knowing the facts, this is not going to work, and you're still continuing it without informing the patient or taking the consent appropriately. So I think let the patient take a call on that. But it can be experimental, it can be under controlled setting, it can be a big trial in India. I think that is the way forward. So I'm just showing a phase 2 study talking about niraparib in mutated HER2/neu patients. And I think this is the mutated HER2/neu. It is not HER2 amplification. So we have to understand that all these terms have implications and can be modified. And there is also talking about using olaparib with paclitaxel in advanced gastric cancer. So these approaches are used in the clinical trial setting as of now, but the selection of these patients again are based on these biomarkers, whether germline or somatic. So we have to, if possible, if we can enroll the patient in these clinical trial would be nice, but in a situation when we have failed the conventional, I think rather than offering metronomic chemotherapy, an attempt should be done for using this target therapy if the patient can afford or acceptable in the board. So again, second line olaparib in gastric cancer, there's a GOLD study, which is a phase 3 study. So again, they are talking about all these alterations, ATM alterations, which affect the HRD pathway where olaparib can be used in gastric cancer. So you will see in so many trials which are coming up, which are going to target these alterations. So we'll switch the gears to the different cancer subtype now. Again, an 80-year-old gentleman with an 8 centimeter non-metastatic situation, a rectal adenocarcinoma. The patient is not suitable for chemotherapy. So we went ahead with the radiation therapy alone and not suitable for for surgery either. So as expected, radiation was done. There was a residual disease, a significant residual disease. And the question was about adjuvant treatment when chemotherapy is not an option in an adjuvant setting with the residual disease. I want my team B panelists, how are you going to handle the situation in a routine clinical practice? A 80-year-old in adjuvant setting when chemotherapy is not an option. So again, when in a non-metastatic setting, we are saying it's a palliative. I think it's a big term to use, so you want to say that you want to label it as a palliative setting right now? Team A, you want to comment on this?
So this gentleman had an unresectable disease due to whatever reason, maybe he was not fit for surgery, and therefore we decided to do radiation as palliative treatment. And so this is a situation which we expected even before we started radiation.
Exactly.
We didn't expect radiation to give you a complete response. And so at the moment, I think we've achieved what we sorted, what we went out after, we said, well, we should just observe him.
Observe with the big man.
And it's a non-localized disease. It's a non-metastatic disease, 80 years old. And he's MSI high, so maybe his own immune system will take care.
Okay. So any role of NGS knowing, and if we have some target and we can use these target therapies, team A and team B. Do you think in a palliative setting, was what you said, should we do NGS to find some more answers?
If the patient is not willing for chemo, even a low-dose chemotherapy, I think we can offer an NGS to decide on some kind of treatment if it's afforded.
Okay, so let's see what the NGS unveils actually. So the NGS was done, a bunch of mutation came out positive actually. And MSI was high, and TMB was 58 mutations per megabase. And this is a recent report. This is this month's report itself actually. So now the big question is, do you want to, now it's a palliative setting, a non-metastatic setting, not all the, you can say MSI is high, how you want to take this with these so many targets in front. And we have BRAF mutation, which is V600E positive, KRAS is wild type. Knowing the fact that patient is going to have a poor prognosis, are we informed enough to treat the patient with immunotherapy? That is the question to team A. You have the NGS report and you want to support the NGS. You are supposed to support NGS. 80, yeah. So 80 immunotherapy is a contraindication? I don't think so. So I think immunotherapy is an option for the patient, yes or no?
Why not? TMB is high.
So I want my team B to counteract that part actually.
One point I'm a bit skeptical about this TMB is the age of the patient. As a person grows old, number of mutations tend to accumulate in the genome.
But it's a somatic mutation, tumor mutation. It is not germline what we are talking about here.
I'll see if I can convince my surgeon to take it out now.
Okay, so surgeon, patient is not convinced. Perfect, I agree. Sir, please.
Until now, we don't have a randomized trial. Somebody, this guy comes with chemotherapy, but if you are a 40-year-old, at that situation, you will be immunotherapy and not take chemotherapy.
So the big question is the wild thought of using immunotherapy upfront is erratic or rational actually? That is what I'm trying to know first. And then, sir, please.
So I'm in a minority here. And the whole question is, I can understand that we are onto this NGS panel, so that's why you are bringing out this thing. But this is non-metastatic rectal cancer. And you said you gave him probably a full course of radiation.
Yeah.
So you have already started treating this patient with some intention of giving some aggressive form of treatment. Radiation at this age, if you are worried about surgery, is not a simple treatment. And so if after radiation, if this patient has got only local disease, why not surgery in today's time in minimally invasive surgery, which is really very, very possible and has least morbidity in terms of treating him, getting rid of his symptoms. Rectal cancer patients, 80 years of age, his main symptom would be the frequency. And your any other medical line of treatment is not going to take care of that particular aspect, which can be taken care of.
Well, we try to convince the patient for surgery for sure, but it's the patient's own choice sometimes because of other comorbidities what we have. And the surgeons also denied. Sir, please.
This question and his statement seems to be loaded in favor of putting TCS and doing immunotherapy.
No. So we had.
Let me explain what you did. You said this patient is unfit. I have seen this patient is unfit for surgery, but this patient has said, rightly pointed out, got a long course of radiation. So if you have to see upfront, with this patient you are going for curative, let me complete, or palliative. If he's going for a curative therapy, is upfront his PS3, then you are going for already, this is going to be palliation, then your radiation is also palliation. Post-radiation, if there is small, it's a mucinous or signaturing type of cells, maybe you can even think of putting something like a bevacizumab on a long term. You may put on something like oral capecitabine, low dose, continuous oral capecitabine. And for that matter, immunotherapy can also have significant toxicity, we all know that.
So that is possible,
So doing the NGS, find some mutation, and thinking of immunotherapy is not something what we decides on a clinical tumor board. Now, it can be a case of immunotherapy, but there are other options as far as palliation is concerned. Palliation is symptomatic improvement, right? While trying to increase the lifespan. So symptomatic improvement can be just putting a simple stoma.
Your point is well taken, sir.
So, Deepanshan has one viewpoint. I have actually 81-year-old patient who said completely operable rectal cancer. I saw him day before yesterday. I gave him epox yesterday. Had I known, I would have offered this. He said, I will die tomorrow, but I will not put stroke. No matter what. He has gone to Canada, he has gone to US, he has gone to all hospitals. He said, show me something other than surgery. I do not want surgery.
Dr. Bora only caters to South Delhi's elitist patient.
So I think I wanted to highlight this aspect that immunotherapy is coming like a buzz, and we are trying to shift gears from the second line metastatic setting to the earlier lines, and people are also working on using in non-metastatic setting right now. So it's a change of mindset, and we are waiting for the data. Will the patient wait for data? That is a big question. So having something in my hand with some answers, I think it's worth offering the patient with some objectivity to it, some rational to it. I think I personally feel that this is the right approach. It can be debated in your molecular tumor boards with your peers to come up with a consensus, and also with a lot of disclaimers and consent from the patient to go ahead with these kind of treatments. So,
We have 18 seconds left.
yeah, 18 seconds left. Okay.
Just wanted to ask the last combination report what you had shown. If TMB, MSI and PD-L1, so for example PD-L1 would have been 60%, 54 TMB and MSI high. Do other reports make any sense in reading that
Yes, the
what
answer
is the
is
driver mutation?
the answer is yes. I would like to read the report for you just for a sake actually. This patient have some positive things and negative things. So we have the PIK3 mutation, which is also now targetable, and there are a lot many clinical trials which talks about colorectal cancers and they're targeting the PIK3 mutations. Definitely yes. The patient also have MSH6 truncation mutation that is there. So possibly this MSI is maybe due to a Lynch syndrome, which might have showing a somatic mutation. And on top of that, the patient also have this FBXW7 mutation. So many people don't understand that much of that. But patients who have this mutation, they are going to show hyper progression on immunotherapy. So if you see lung data where you see this mutation, they will show hyper progression. So though we have the answers, we can predict what's going to happen with this immunotherapy also. So your point is taken right that immunotherapy comes with a lot of side effects also. So with that, I think I would like to, please.
Just like to add here that at this age and this kind of profile of the patient, we may do some limited testing also. We can, ultimately after doing all this, we decided to give immunotherapy.
Yes. Perfect.
We can do that by doing MMR testing on IHC plus PD-L1.
I would agree to the using the smaller panel upfront and then going NGS later. I'm not here to say that NGS is the first step to be done. I'm saying NGS can throw a lot of lights and options to the patient. So standard panel, PAN-RAS, MSI is must. You should include your codons, your as well as all the codons that is more important, exon 2, 3, and 4 with BRAF testing. And this is very important. There's a lot of, you can say, question in my mind also. A patient who has BRAF testing positive, which is a poor prognosis, and an MSI high, which is also a surrogate, which is a good prognosis, how they, you can say, tag along each together actually. So that's a big question in my mind also, how to interpret those situations like what we have in this patient. But smaller panel to begin with. If you hit a KRAS mutation, then I think it's the end of the road, because beyond that, whatever target you have, it's going to be a poor prognosis. So that's my take on it.
Thank you.
Just one point. For the first patient, 42-year-old with stomach gastric cancer, yes, you can do the treatment of the patient, but at the same time, germline testing is very necessary.
I think the point is well. Yeah, so the point is well taken. There are certain reports which talks about gastric cancers and HBOC syndromes. So there is no harm doing germline panel when you hit a somatic mutation, which is maybe a probable reason. You inquire more about the family history to get some idea what syndrome you are probably dealing with. I think. Yeah. So. I totally agree. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. Dr. Viraj, you want to conclude something?
No, sir. We can conclude the session.
Yeah, please. So running out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, and thank you all the panelists.
Thank you very much.
And I think so we'll break for lunch. It was an excellent NGS discussion. But the thing is, because we ran late 15 minutes, I would suggest everyone be back in 1